it's really helpful for me to see not just their academic learning, but their conversation skills. Are they inviting other people into the conversation? Are they clearly really listening and building on each other's ideas? Are they genuinely using a conversation to co-construct understanding? So the more I can see that over time, the better. So video recordings and conversation maps are really great assessment tools.
Hello there. My name is Monica Burns, and welcome to today's episode of the Easy EdTech podcast. It is 2024, and whether you're joining for the first time, 100th time, or for the 200th time, I am so glad you're here. I have lots of exciting things in store for you this year. Each episode of the Easy EdTech podcast is designed to give you ideas you can try yourself, share with a colleague, or bookmark for later in the school year. Get ready for stories from my time in the classroom, the work I do now with schools and districts, and my travels to different EdTech events, as well as practical ideas and inspiring stories from new guests each month. If we mention something you'd like to check out, you'll find the link to it in the show notes. So don't forget to head to my website, classtechtips.com/podcast, for all of the show notes and resources from today's episode. This episode is sponsored by my new free ebook, 10 Ways School Leaders Can Use AI Tomorrow. It's completely free, and you can find it by going to classtechtips.com/AI leader. Looking to bring a touch of AI magic into your school? This free ebook unpacks 10 ideas you can start using today, tomorrow, or at any point this school year. It includes quick ways to integrate AI into your daily routines, offering a handful of my favorite tips and tricks. You can try them out yourself, then pass along the ones you like the most to your teachers and colleagues. They'll certainly thank you for it. So head to classtechtips.com/AI leader. That's one word, no spaces. My website is classtechtips.com, then /AI leader. This week's episode is titled Tips for Fostering Academic Conversations with Jennifer Orr. Jen is a fellow ASCD author, and we ran into each other at ASCD's annual conference this past March. We caught up a bit in the hallway in between sessions, which is one of my favorite things about conferences. And then I reached out to see if she would join us for a conversation about conversations. She has a lot of great tips to share, so let's dive right into our conversation together. Welcome to the podcast. I am so excited to chat with you about academic conversations and demystifying discussion. But before we jump into all of that and some of the technology connection, would love to hear more about your role in education. What does your day-to-day look like?
Well, this is my 26th year of elementary school classroom teaching. So I've taught grades from kindergarten through 5th grade, currently with 4th graders. So as I've evolved in teaching over, a quarter of a century, it's been interesting to see kind of how both education has shifted and how I have shifted. Mm-hmm. There are some things I don't need to think about anymore that are second nature this many years in, leaving me free to do some other things that I wouldn't have been able to do before. But also, as kind of the landscape in education has shifted, I'm grateful to have years of experience to be able to spend some of my time every day supporting newer teachers. We have so many young or career switching, young in their career teachers. And so the more I can do to help them out, because I feel like the job has gotten harder and harder over those 25 years. Mm-hmm. So I spend a lot of my time before school and during planning and meeting with some of these teachers or trying to put together things that they've asked about, or working with them to observe me or observe them and then debrief and talk. And so I think that's become a much bigger part of my role than I had anticipated.
Yeah, and that mentor role, right? And hearing what people in all the different stages, right, of their career are working on and what's happening in your classroom, really leads us into today's conversation. Today, we're talking about academic conversations and student discussion. Can you explain or help unpack that term, academic conversations, for us?
Absolutely. As I think of academic conversations, and different people honestly may think of that term differently, for me, it's about students talking with one another, whether that's just two students chatting, whether that's a small group or a whole class, about their learning, about the content and the skills that they're gaining. And so hopefully taking whatever conversation skills they have or conversation skills we're working on to really help them co-construct new understanding and grow in their learning.
And I think that idea of growing together, right, co-constructing learning is something that we see when students have the time, which isn't always carved out, right, to talk, to unpack, right, what they're learning. And how do academic conversations look in different environments, such as, physical, we're all together in a classroom, digital, we're connecting online, or even the elementary, and I don't want to say versus the secondary, but maybe as opposed to the secondary piece.
Absolutely. I honestly think it's not that different across the ages. Having done it with kindergartners through fifth graders, which there's a pretty wide range of difference between 5-year-olds and 12-year-olds. But even also having co-authored another book with a high school English teacher, I'm astounded at the similarities. I mean, kids can discuss more sophisticated things. Honestly, as they get older, they may take things more personally than they do when they're younger, which I think makes it even harder in the secondary classroom. But they also have stronger skills to engage in conversations at that level. The in-person versus virtual was not something I had really thought much about before COVID.
Yeah.
And then suddenly at the height of my passion around academic conversations, I was online with third graders. And the biggest challenge to me was, I think that one of the best parts about engaging in conversations in a classroom is that kids can turn and talk with one partner.
Yeah.
And that's such a powerful thing because every kid gets the chance to talk.
Yeah.
Every kid gets to hear someone else's ideas. They don't hear a lot of ideas, but everybody gets to engage in conversation. And in the virtual setting, sending everybody off to breakout rooms for a 1-minute conversation, it didn't have the same would have in person. But on the positive side, it was really interesting to see students who might not have said anything in a whole class conversation put things in the chat.
Yeah.
That back channel or that other option of a way to participate in the conversation. And I've seen that. I teach an undergrad class on children's literature for diverse populations. I've seen the exact same thing with undergrads. People who, and in the virtual setting, maybe can't turn on their camera or mic or don't feel comfortable doing so, have a way to participate and to have their voice and ideas put out there, which is really an exciting thing. And I haven't quite figured out how to, just as I haven't figured out how to make the turn and talk with a partner work in the virtual setting, I haven't figured out how to make that other channel work in in-person setting.
I think those are such great points when we think about, both elementary versus secondary, right? The younger kids are probably less likely to take something so personally when one of their peers is giving them feedback in the same way it might stick with a secondary student through the rest of the day. And that turn and talk, right? Everyone can participate, right, in a conversation is so valuable, right, throughout the grade levels. But I really appreciate what you mentioned about, as much as we might all have our breakout room stories, right, of times when nobody would turn on their camera. And I'm thinking of this more from an adult professional learning standpoint, right? Or, I often do webinars for groups that are after school, right? So some people are on the move, right? And with their best of intentions, it's not personal, right? It's just if they're going to participate, that's, the best they can offer in that time period. But having those other options to jump into a chat, to give a different kind of feedback, right? Or, we can't spit out the link that goes with something we're talking about, but to be able to drop that link in, right, at the same time, right, is pretty, it's pretty interesting to think about the pros and cons or just the assets to being in all these different spaces. So, one thing that I'm sure comes up in your conversations around what it means to bring this into a classroom setting is how do we assess or measure the quality and the impact of academic conversations?
I think that's always a question in education. What does this mean for how we understand what our students have learned and where they are on their growth journey? It's also, by chance, one of the things I didn't realize I was going to love so much about academic conversations. But what I have found over time is that I have a much better insight into their understanding from listening to conversations than I do from a test or even from a paper they turn into me with some problems in math or with, a piece of writing. because they're sharing their thinking in a way that often doesn't happen elsewhere.
Yeah.
So that's been huge. And there's a couple of things that help me with that. Pardon me. One is I video record conversations sometimes. Another shift in 26 years. I remember doing my national boards for the first time.
Yeah.
And buy a video camera. I could just sit my phone on a little stand
Oh my gosh.
and immediately hit record. And then I don't even have to pay attention to it. I can like walk around and listen to kids, or I can put in a question if I need to, because I don't have to pay attention to the recording. But then I have that I can look at later. Now, I also know, as I'm still a classroom teacher, that if I record a 15-minute conversation, then somewhere later I need to carve out 15 minutes to listen to it. And more than 15 minutes. So I'm not going to record every conversation. That's just not sustainable. So I also do conversation maps where I write down the names of the students kind of in the oval shape they're sitting in. And I draw lines from kid to kid as they speak. So I can track the conversation and make notes outside of that circle with a few things they're saying that I want to remember. I might then flip the page over and note something that's like a surprising misconception where I think, oh, we really don't understand that idea today. I will never, the first time this really hit me was a conversation about how are rectangles and squares the same or different. And I thought, oh my goodness, my kids have no understanding of the relationship between rectangles and squares. I totally did not know that from any other work we had done in the classroom. And suddenly I'm thinking, okay, I got to change what I'm doing tomorrow in math so we can look at them. So having conversation maps is really helpful. I haven't yet found the right tech tool that I would really like. My 17-year-old just got a Remarkable. I'm thinking maybe potential. I'd like to be able to do that digitally.
Yeah.
Where I could, because honestly, this is a problem I have with paper. I lose the papers. I'd like to be able to have those records of that conversation map tracked over time. It's really helpful for me to see not just their academic learning, but their conversation skills. Are they inviting other people into the conversation? Are they clearly really listening and building on each other's ideas? Are they genuinely using a conversation to co-construct understanding? So the more I can kind of see that over time, the better. So video recordings and conversation maps are really great assessment tools. I also sometimes just have kids after a classroom conversation go write about it for a few minutes.
Yeah.
And then I can see what they got from it and not just assume what I think they got from it. This is more challenging with kindergartners and first graders.
Yeah.
Third or fourth, they can write me a few sentences and help me understand what they learned from listening to their classmate.
Yeah. And, even as you're talking about, the kind of the two pieces there, like I could imagine that a tool someone would use for sketchnoting or like a Remarkable, right, would work really well. I think there's times that it's great to have a stylus in your hand, right, for some more flexibility, right, especially if you're connecting with conversation in a conversation map. And for students who are, at that younger, the K1, 2 level, I'm sure even, doing the quick voice recording or a, quick flip video, like formerly Flipgrid, I always feel like I need to say both at the same time, is a way for them to debrief, right? Like, this is what I heard, this is what I learned. So I love that. And, maybe that gets into this next question I wanted to ask you about, what are the platforms or tools that you have found effective for facilitating academic conversations online? You mentioned some of the chats, right, or the back channels, right? Is it possible to create a sense of community when students are, actively participating, right, in online spaces?
The sense of community is such a big piece of conversations. Without that sense of community, you're not going to get conversations that really have the power you want them to have. Kids are not going to feel safe to engage in it in the way you want them to. I think in a synchronous online setting, that the chat and the microphones are enough for me. But even in person, I think there's something to being able to pull out pieces of that conversation to come back to. When I went to teaching first graders after 10 years of teaching fourth and fifth graders, I kind of had a moment of panic where I thought, they can't write and read.
Right.
I had fourth and fifth graders who were making wikis as we went through the year to come back for this big end of year project. So we were kind of gathering our thinking all year. Thought first graders can't do this. And VoiceThread, this has been 15 years,
right,
was a gift for me because it did the same kind of thing with kids who couldn't yet do that in text. Flip has done some of the same ideas. So after a conversation, I might have kids make a flip instead of writing. And then I can go through those and pull out the 2 or 3 that have some really meaty ideas and put them in our Schoology classroom and have kids respond to them. Like, keep that conversation building over time outside of our classroom space or outside of, I mean, they may be doing it in the classroom, but where we're not all gathered in person together. So being able to take that technology to pull ideas out that I think, oh, there's more they can build on with this. They're going to talk more about this piece of that book, or they're going to talk more about this math strategy that they weren't really getting yet, but this kid's explained it well. And if they keep building on it, so Flip or VoiceThread or any of those kinds of tools that allow kids to record themselves have been really useful for that.
Yeah. And, as we're thinking here too, almost like, you mentioning VoiceThread, it's fun, right? Like one that was really gaining a lot of popularity in the past, right? Isn't something that isn't, an everyday practice right now. Maybe there's an alternative tool, right, that someone's using.
Right.
Do you have like a wish list, right? Is there, in what ways do you think technology could, further evolve to better support academic conversations, whether it's something that kids are doing face to face or online?
That's such a great question. I think at this point, I feel like what has happened a lot in technology is that we have really phenomenal tools to do the kinds of things that we want to do with kids that adults are using. The kinds of tools that you use to podcast. I want kids to be able to do some of that same kind of thing, but those tools are not, they take more time to learn than I can commit to.
Yeah.
I have my students right now are recording into Audacity to make really short little podcasts about their research on colonial America.
Love it.
But I'm having to do far more of that work than I would like because I haven't found the time to invest in helping them learn how to do it.
Yeah.
I'd love to have more simplified versions of some of these tools that don't lose the power. And that may be a ridiculous thing to ask for, but I would love to be able to have my 4th graders engage in some conversations about their research or about a book we're reading in the way of like a 3-minute podcast without needing to spend days helping them learn how to use a tool.
Yeah. And I think it's particularly right at the level that you teach, but, scaled all the way up, right? Like the more that we can use something that is open-ended, that provides enough options, right, for students that you can revisit a couple times over the year, or the buttons, right, or are big enough for everyone to find them, right, or have that level of ease so that there is, some independence. I think that's a good kind of wish list item, right, when you're looking for something to bring into a group. So, can you tell us more about your book, Demystifying Discussion? What will people find when they open this up?
I hope what they'll find is kind of a guide to engaging kids in academic conversations. I've come to realize, and part of this came out of conversations with my co-author of the second book, who, again, high school English teacher, we've come to realize that talk is in all of the standards from kindergarten through 12th grade. Oral language is a piece of standards everywhere. And yet, to the best of what we can figure out, no one's ever taught how to do it. There's no courses that address this in undergrad. There's not even a whole lot of PD around it. And so somehow it's just have your kids talk. And that's, we assume that's good enough. And kids are talking all the time.
Right.
I think there's a sense of, if they talk, that's great. But I think there's a lot more. And let me take a step back. Having them talk in general is powerful.
Yeah.
In Hattie's research, just classroom conversations have a really big payoff. I think, and I'm going to make sure this is my thought and not anything I can fully back up yet. I think that's just having kids talk to each other. Whereas if you really help kids develop their skills at listening to one another, their skills at asking questions of each other to build new ideas, their skills of adding on their idea to someone else's, their skills at kind of paraphrasing and synthesizing. These are all things that I talk about in the book and how to help kids learn to do them better. I think then we will see classroom conversations having an even bigger payoff for kids than just saying, hey, talk to somebody about this.
I love that because I do think for, someone who might be asking kids, right, to do that turn and talk, right, having that level of intention, understanding what the goals are, understanding the research behind it is so crucial. So For someone who's on the go today, right? Of course, I'll link out to all the things, right, that we're talking about so they can find your book, they can find you on social and all of that. But where can people connect with you? Where can they learn more about your work?
Well, the book is obviously a good place to start. The second book is from Stenhouse. So the Stenhouse site has a book called We're Going to Keep on Talking about engaging in conversations about race with elementary children. My website is really easy. It's JenOrr, JenOrr.com. I am on Twitter at Jen Orr, but not much anymore these days. But Blue Sky, hoping Blue Sky is going to take off. So I'm there as Jen Orr as well.
Awesome. Well, we'll link out, to everything for people to be able to find and to connect with you. Jen, this was so wonderful. Really appreciate you joining the podcast today.
Thank you, Monica. I really had a good time.
It was so much fun chatting with Jennifer today. Let's make this EdTech easy with a few key points from the episode. Give students time to talk. Discussions look similar and different in primary and secondary classrooms. Think about your intention for classroom conversations. Leverage digital tools for reflection. Remember, you can find the show notes and full list of resources from today's episode, including all of the ways to connect with Jennifer Orr, by going to classtechtips.com/podcast and finding today's episode number 269. This episode is sponsored by my new free ebook, 10 Ways School Leaders Can Use AI Tomorrow. It's completely free, and you can find it by going to classtechtips.com/AI leader. Looking to bring a touch of AI magic into your school? This free ebook unpacks 10 ideas you can start using today, tomorrow, or at any point this school year. It includes quick ways to integrate AI into your daily routines, offering a handful of my favorite tips and tricks. You can try them out yourself, then pass along the ones you like the most to your teachers and colleagues. They'll certainly thank you for it. So head to classtechtips.com/AI leader. That's one word, no spaces. My website is classtechtips.com, then /AI leader. This March, we'll celebrate 5 years of the Easy EdTech podcast. To help celebrate, I'm hoping you can do us a favor. Leave a rating or review for the podcast wherever you're listening today. Spotify will let you tap on the stars, and Apple Podcasts will let you tap on the stars too and leave a 1 or 2 sentence review. A big thank you in advance for helping us get ready to celebrate this March.